I need to be honest with you. Something is happening at grocery stores right now that most preppers are completely missing. And when I show you what's actually getting discontinued, you're going to understand why the next 12 months are critical for building your stockpile. I've been tracking food manufacturing trends for the past 7 years, and I'm seeing something that honestly keeps me up at night. Major food companies are quietly discontinuing specific products that have been staples for decades. Not because of shortages, but because of regulation changes, profit margins, and shifting production priorities. And here's what's terrifying. These are not foods you can easily replace. Hit that subscribe button right now because what I'm about to share could literally save your family when everyone else is scrambling. Food number 1 is real maple syrup. Okay? This first one is going to shock you. Real, pure maple syrup. And before you think I'm crazy, let me explain what's happening behind the scenes. Last month, I spoke with a distributor who's worked with maple syrup producers for 15 years. He told me something that made my blood run cold. 70% of small maple syrup operations in the Northeast shut down in the last 3 years. The reason? Climate shifts are destroying tap seasons. Trees are not producing sap like they used to. What used to be a 6-week season is now down to 2 weeks in some regions. But here's where it gets worse. The big brands you see at the store are not actually real maple syrup anymore. Check the label. Most of them now say pancake syrup or maple flavored syrup. That means corn syrup with artificial flavoring. The actual pure maple syrup market is collapsing. I started stockpiling real maple syrup 2 years ago, and here's why you should too. First, it literally lasts forever when stored properly. Unopened bottles can last indefinitely. Even if it crystallizes, you just heat it gently and it's perfect again. But the real value is what maple syrup provides in a survival situation. Instant energy, minerals like manganese and zinc, and psychological comfort. When you're eating bland rice for the 10th day straight, drizzling real maple syrup on it transforms morale. I'm talking about the difference between your family giving up and pushing through. Here's my storage method. Buy pure maple syrup in glass bottles, not plastic. Glass prevents any potential chemical leaching over time. Store them in a cool, dark place. I keep mine in the basement where temperature stays consistent. Pro tip, buy directly from small producers at farmers markets. You'll pay less than retail and you're getting it before it even hits distribution. Right now, a quart of real maple syrup costs about $15. In 5 years, if these trends continue, that same bottle could be $50 or simply unavailable. I personally have 30 bottles stored. That's not hoarding, that's understanding market reality. And when everyone else is stuck with fake corn syrup garbage, you'll have the real thing. Food number 2 is real vanilla extract. Number 2 is sitting in your baking aisle right now, but it's disappearing fast. Real vanilla extract. Not imitation, real. Let me tell you what's happening with vanilla that nobody's talking about. Vanilla comes from orchids grown primarily in Madagascar. That region has been hit with devastating cyclones, political instability, and now disease affecting the crops. Production dropped by 40% in the last 2 years. I learned this from a pastry chef friend who owns a bakery. She told me her vanilla supplier tripled prices in 18 months and is now limiting how much she can order. Businesses are getting priority, which means retail is going to dry up. But here's what makes this critical for preppers. Real vanilla extract is basically alcohol-based, which means it lasts indefinitely. I've got bottles that are 5 years old, still perfect, And in a crisis situation, vanilla is not just for cookies. Adding a few drops to oatmeal, rice pudding, or even coffee completely changes the experience. It makes survival food feel human. Here's something wild. Vanilla extract contains trace amounts of vanillin, which has actual mood-boosting properties. During high-stress situations, these little psychological wins matter more than people realize. The cost difference is dramatic. Right now, a 4-ounce bottle of real vanilla extract costs about $8. Imitation is $2, but imitation is just chemicals. It doesn't have the depth or complexity, and more importantly, it won't hold value. Here's my strategy. Every time I go shopping, I buy 2 bottles of real vanilla extract. I rotate through them in my regular baking, so nothing goes to waste. But I keep a core stockpile of 10 bottles sealed and stored in a dark cabinet. That 10 bottles cost me $80 total, but represents something most preppers completely overlook: the ability to make your stockpile food actually enjoyable. When you can bake real cookies during a crisis, that's powerful for morale. Food number 3 is sardines packed in olive oil. All right, number 3 is one of those foods that people either love or hate, but from a prepping standpoint, it's absolutely critical. Sardines packed in olive oil. And here's why they're about to become way harder to find. European fisheries are implementing new sustainability regulations that are slashing sardine quotas. Portugal and Spain, the 2 biggest producers, cut their harvests by 30% this year alone. At the same time, demand is skyrocketing because people are finally realizing how nutritious sardines are. Let me break down why sardines are prepper gold. 1 contains omega-3 fatty acids, calcium from the bones, vitamin D, and complete protein. You're getting 17 grams of protein per can. That's almost as much as 3 eggs. But here's the key. They must be packed in olive oil, not water or soybean oil. The olive oil serves 3 purposes. First, it preserves the fish even longer. Second, it provides additional healthy fats your body desperately needs. Third, you can use that oil for cooking after you eat the sardines. I did a test last year. I opened a can of sardines packed in olive oil that was 7 years old. It was still perfect. No off smell, no weird texture, completely safe and delicious. Compare that to other canned fish that goes funky after 2 years. Here's how I use sardines in my regular rotation. I mash them up with a fork, mix in some mustard and crackers. Instant, nutritious meal. Or I toss them into pasta with garlic. The oil from the can becomes the sauce base. During a camping trip last fall, we were stuck in rain for 4 days. Hot food was difficult, but sardines, crackers, and some dried fruit kept us going. The fat content kept us warm and energized. The current price for quality sardines packed in olive oil is about $3 per can. That's reasonable now, but I'm watching prices creep up every month. 6 months ago, the same can was $2.50. I keep about 60 cans in my stockpile. That cost me around $180. But think about what you're getting: shelf-stable protein and fat that will outlast almost everything else in your pantry. Here's the insider move. Go to ethnic grocery stores, Portuguese or Spanish markets. They have better quality sardines at lower prices than mainstream supermarkets. Food number 4 is active dry yeast in bulk. Number 4 is something that disappeared completely in 2020, and most people still haven't restocked properly: active dry yeast in bulk packaging. Here's what most preppers don't understand. Those little packets of yeast you buy at the grocery store are a ripoff, and they don't last. But commercial yeast in vacuum-sealed pouches or jars can last years. I'm talking 5, even 10 years when stored in the freezer. Let me tell you what happened during the last panic. Yeast vanished completely. People were stuck at home wanting to bake bread, and within 3 days, every store was cleaned out. But here's what nobody realized. Commercial restaurant supply stores still had yeast in bulk. 1-pound vacuum packs sitting there, untouched, because regular people didn't know to look. Yeast is critical for psychological survival. Being able to make fresh bread during a crisis is not just about calories. It's about normalcy. The smell of bread baking is one of the most comforting things humans experience. I learned about bulk yeast from a homesteader who bakes all her own bread. She told me she buys yeast in 1-pound bags, transfers it to mason jars, and keeps them in the freezer. 1 pound of yeast is the equivalent of about 64 of those little packets. The cost comparison is insane. A 1-pound bag of commercial yeast costs about $6. Those little packets are usually $1 each for a 1/4 ounce. You're paying 16 times more for the convenience packaging. Here's my exact storage method. Buy yeast in bulk, either online or from a restaurant supply store. Transfer it immediately into a mason jar with a tight seal. Write the date on the jar. Store it in the freezer if you have room, or in the fridge if you don't. If you lose power, yeast can handle being at room temperature for weeks as long as it stays dry. Pro tip: test your yeast once a year. Mix a teaspoon with warm water and a pinch of sugar. If it bubbles up within 10 minutes, it's still good. I keep 3 1-pound bags in my freezer. That's enough to bake bread several times a week for over a year. And when the next shortage hits, I'm not scrambling. Food number 5 is whole black peppercorns. Number 5 sounds boring, but stay with me because this is one of the smartest preps you can make. Whole black peppercorns. Not ground pepper, whole peppercorns. Here's the issue. Ground pepper loses potency within months. It oxidizes, flavor fades, and eventually it's just dusty nothing. But whole peppercorns, when stored in an airtight container, maintain their flavor and potency for years. Some sources say decades. Now, why does this matter for prepping? Because pepper is not just flavor. Throughout history, pepper was literally used as currency. It was valuable enough to start wars over. And there's a reason. It makes bland food edible, it has antimicrobial properties, and it aids digestion. But here's what's happening right now. Vietnam and India produce most of the world's black pepper. Both countries are experiencing severe weather disruptions affecting crops. Prices have already increased 40% in the last year. I spoke with a spice importer last month. He told me his costs doubled, and he's struggling to get consistent supply. That cost increase hasn't fully hit retail yet, but it's coming. Here's the play. Buy whole black peppercorns in bulk right now. I'm talking 1 or 2 pound bags. Get a basic pepper mill, the kind you can refill. 1 pound of whole peppercorns will last a family of 4 at least a year of regular use. The cost is minimal. A 1 pound bag runs about $12. Compare that to those tiny grocery store containers of ground pepper at $5 for 2 ounces. You're getting way more value and way longer shelf life. Storage is simple. Keep them in an airtight container in a cool, dark place. I use mason jars in my pantry. No special prep needed. And here's a survival hack. If you ever need to preserve meat without refrigeration, black pepper is part of the traditional curing process. It's not just for flavor, it's functional. I keep 5 pounds of whole black peppercorns in my stockpile. That cost me about $50 total. It takes up minimal space, will last longer than I will, and provides something that makes every meal better. Food number 6 is raw honey from local sources. All right, number 6 is something I'm incredibly serious about. Raw, unfiltered honey from local sources. And here's why this is disappearing. Bee populations are collapsing. You've probably heard about colony collapse disorder, but what you might not know is that commercial beekeepers are losing 30 to 40% of their hives every single year. Small local beekeepers are shutting down because it's not economically viable anymore. Within the next 5 years, real raw honey is going to be incredibly expensive or simply unavailable. Let me explain why raw honey is non-negotiable for your stockpile. First, it never expires. Archaeologists found honey in Egyptian tombs that is 3,000 years old and still edible. As long as it's sealed and stays dry, honey is immortal. But raw honey specifically has enzymes, antioxidants, and antibacterial properties that processed honey doesn't have. That grocery store honey in the bear-shaped bottle has been heated and filtered so much that it's basically just sugar syrup. Here's a real-life example. 2 winters ago, my daughter got a nasty cough that wouldn't quit. We were snowed in, couldn't get to a doctor. I gave her a spoonful of raw honey mixed with a little warm water. Within 2 days, the cough was gone. Raw honey has natural antibacterial and soothing properties that have been used medicinally for thousands of years. In a collapse scenario where antibiotics are unavailable, honey can be used topically on wounds to prevent infection. This is documented. Hospitals actually use medical-grade honey for wound care. But here's the critical part. It must be raw, unprocessed honey. The heating process destroys the beneficial compounds. Right now, you can still find local beekeepers selling raw honey at farmers markets or through local co-ops. A quart usually costs around $20. Yes, that's more expensive than store honey, but you're getting something fundamentally different. I personally keep 10 quarts of raw honey in my stockpile. That's about $200 invested. But that honey will outlast me, my kids, and probably my grandkids. Storage is simple. Keep it in the original glass jar with the lid tight. Store in a cool, dark place. If it crystallizes, that's actually proof it's real. Just set the jar in warm water and it liquefies again. And here's something most people don't think about. Honey is an incredible energy source. 1 tablespoon contains 64 calories of pure, quick-burning fuel. For bug-out situations or high-exertion scenarios, honey is perfect. Food number 7 is fermented hot sauce. Number 7 is going to surprise you, but it's based on something I learned from a food scientist. Fermented hot sauce. Not the vinegar-based stuff, real lacto-fermented hot sauce. Here's what makes this brilliant. Fermented hot sauce contains live probiotics, which are critical for gut health. In a survival situation where you're eating different foods than normal, your digestive system is going to struggle. Probiotics help prevent that. But here's the key. Fermented hot sauce, when properly made, continues to ferment slowly and actually becomes more complex over time. I've got bottles that are 3 years old and they're incredible. The flavor deepens and the probiotic content stays active. Why is this being discontinued? Because fermentation is unpredictable for large-scale manufacturing. Big food companies want consistent, shelf-stable products. Fermented hot sauce requires refrigeration after opening and has a shorter commercial shelf life. So they're shifting to vinegar-based versions with preservatives. If you look at the hot sauce aisle, now most brands have already switched. Here's how I stockpile this. I buy small batch fermented hot sauce from local makers, or I make my own. Making it is dead simple. Blend hot peppers with salt, let it sit at room temperature for a week, then store it in the fridge. The fermentation process creates natural preservation. I keep about 20 bottles in my fridge. Each bottle costs around $8 from local makers. That's $160, but it represents two things: flavor that makes bland food edible and probiotics that keep your gut healthy. In a grid-down situation, digestive issues can become life-threatening. Having fermented foods is critical, and hot sauce is one of the easiest to store and use. Pro tip: if you lose power and your fridge goes down, fermented hot sauce can actually handle being room temperature for weeks because the fermentation creates an acidic environment that prevents bad bacteria. Food number 8 is specialty grains. Number 8 is where smart preppers separate from the crowd. Specialty grains like quinoa, farro, and millet. Here's what's happening. These grains are grown in very specific regions. Quinoa comes primarily from Peru and Bolivia. Farro comes from Italy. Millet comes from India and Africa. All these regions are experiencing either climate disruptions, political instability, or export restrictions. At the same time, demand is increasing because people are diversifying their diets. The result? Prices are climbing and availability is dropping. Let me tell you why this matters. Most preppers stockpile rice and wheat. That's it. But eating the same grain for weeks is going to destroy morale. Having variety keeps you sane. But, more importantly, different grains have different nutritional profiles. Quinoa is a complete protein with all 9 essential amino acids. Farro is high in fiber and magnesium. Millet is gluten-free and packed with B vitamins. By rotating through different grains, you're covering nutritional gaps. Here's my strategy. I keep 25 pounds each of quinoa, farro, and millet in food-grade buckets with oxygen absorbers. That's 75 pounds total of specialty grains. The cost was about $150. Storage is the same as any grain: cool, dark, dry. In sealed buckets with oxygen absorbers, these grains last 10 to 20 years easily. And here's the cooking advantage. All 3 cook faster than wheat berries and require less fuel. Quinoa cooks in 15 minutes. Farro in 20. Millet in 20. Compare that to rice at 40 minutes or wheat berries at an hour. In a fuel-scarce situation, that efficiency matters. I rotate these into my regular cooking, so nothing goes to waste. Make a quinoa salad, farro soup, millet porridge. Your family gets used to eating them, and when you need to rely on your stockpile, it's not a shock. Food number 9 is freeze-dried fruits. Number 9 is something that's getting quietly phased out by major brands. Freeze-dried fruits, not dehydrated, freeze-dried. Here's the difference. Dehydrated fruit is heated to remove moisture. This destroys a lot of vitamins and changes the texture. Freeze-dried fruit is frozen, and then the moisture is removed in a vacuum. It maintains almost all the nutritional value and rehydrates perfectly. But freeze-drying is expensive. It requires specialized equipment and a lot of energy. With rising energy costs, companies are shifting away from freeze-dried products to cheaper dehydrated versions. If you look at the labels now, brands that used to offer freeze-dried are switching to dried without specifying the method. That's code for dehydrated. Here's why freeze-dried fruit is critical for your stockpile. First, it lasts 25 to 30 years when stored properly. Second, it retains almost all the vitamin C, antioxidants, and fiber. Third, it's incredibly lightweight. 1 pound of freeze-dried strawberries is the equivalent of about 8 pounds of fresh strawberries. For bug-out bags or situations where weight matters, this is huge. I learned this from a backpacker who does month-long trips. He only carries freeze-dried fruit because it gives him the nutrients he needs without the weight. Here's my buying strategy. I watch for sales at outdoor supply stores or online. Freeze-dried fruit is expensive, usually around $20 per pound. But when it goes on sale, I stock up. I currently have about 15 pounds of mixed freeze-dried fruits, strawberries, blueberries, apples, bananas. That cost me around $250 over time buying on sales. Storage is simple. Keep them in the original sealed pouches or transfer to Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. Store in a cool, dark place. And here's a pro tip. Freeze-dried fruit is an incredible morale booster. When you're eating bland survival food, being able to snack on strawberries that taste fresh is psychologically huge. Food number 10 is canned butter. Number 10 is something that most Americans don't even know exists. Canned butter. This is real butter that's been canned and shelf stable for years. It's primarily made in New Zealand and Australia. And here's the problem. Import costs are skyrocketing and availability in the US is already limited. I discovered canned butter 2 years ago while researching shelf-stable fats. A 12-ounce can costs about $10 and lasts up to 3 years at room temperature, longer if refrigerated. But here's why it's disappearing. The companies that make it are small operations. They're not big corporate manufacturers. And with shipping costs increasing, many are stopping exports to the US market. Right now, you can still find it online or at specialty prepper stores, but I'm watching inventory levels drop. Here's why canned butter is worth the cost. In a survival situation, fat is critical. Your body needs it for energy, warmth, and brain function. Most survival foods are low in fat, but 1 can of butter provides pure, shelf-stable fat that you can use for cooking, baking, or just eating straight. I tested this during a week-long camping trip. We used canned butter for everything: cooking eggs, making pancakes, spreading on bread. It tasted exactly like regular butter. No weird flavor, no strange texture. My family couldn't tell the difference. Storage is simple. Keep the cans in a cool, dark place. Don't freeze them because expansion can damage the seal. I keep 12 cans in my stockpile. That's about $120 invested. But that represents a fat source that requires no refrigeration and lasts years. Compare that to trying to stockpile regular butter, which is impossible. Food number 11 is MSG. All right, number 11 is controversial, but I don't care because it's based on science. Pure monosodium glutamate, MSG. Before you freak out, let me explain. MSG has been vilified for decades based on bad science. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have proven it's safe. It's just a concentrated form of glutamate, which naturally occurs in tomatoes, cheese, and mushrooms. But here's why it matters for prepping. MSG is a flavor enhancer. A tiny amount makes bland food taste incredible. When you're eating rice and beans for the 15th day straight, a pinch of MSG transforms it into something your brain recognizes as satisfying. And here's what's happening. Major food manufacturers are removing MSG from products because of public perception, even though it's safe. They're replacing it with natural flavors, which is often just MSG from a different source, but more expensive. Pure MSG is becoming harder to find in stores. Right now, you can still buy it at Asian grocery stores. A 1-pound container costs about $5 and will last you years. I keep 2 pounds in my stockpile. That's $10 total for something that makes every single meal better. Storage is simple. Keep it in an airtight container in a cool, dry place. It lasts indefinitely. And here's the pro move. Combine MSG with nutritional yeast and garlic powder. This creates a flavor bomb that you can sprinkle on literally anything. Rice, vegetables, soups, whatever. Suddenly your survival food tastes like restaurant quality. Look, I get it. MSG has a bad reputation, but that reputation is based on one flawed study from the 1960s that's been debunked repeatedly. If you're serious about making your stockpile food actually edible during a long-term crisis, MSG is a game changer. All right, here's the truth. These 11 foods are either getting discontinued, becoming harder to find, or skyrocketing in price. And most preppers are completely missing them because they are focused on the same old rice and beans everyone talks about. I'm not saying don't stock rice and beans. I'm saying supplement your stockpile with these items while you still can. If you found this helpful, smash that like button so I know you want more content like this. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 11 foods surprised you the most. And subscribe, because next week I'm revealing the 5 prepper strategies that actually make you less safe. Some of what you've been taught is flat out wrong, and I'm going to prove it.